A simple favor turned into something I never saw coming, and it changed everything. It started as a simple act of neighborly kindness. The widow next door, a 40-year-old American woman with long black hair, lightly tanned skin, subtle freckles, and soft laugh lines, had always carried herself with a quiet, graceful presence. Her elegance wasn't just in her appearance, though her curvy figure and poised posture drew attention, but in the way she moved through the world with careful thought, as if every step was measured yet effortlessly natural. The day she knocked on the door asking for help with her heavy grocery bags, there was a flutter of something unspoken. Hands met for a brief moment as the weight shifted, and the warmth of her touch lingered longer than expected. It wasn't just the physical contact, it was the steadiness, the reassurance in her touch that sent a subtle jolt through the chest. The way she looked up at me with dark brown eyes, slightly shaded with a tinge of vulnerability, yet brimming with quiet confidence, left an impression that words could not capture. As we carried the groceries into her sunlit kitchen, the mundane became intimate. The scent of fresh bread and warm coffee mingled with the soft hum of neighborhood life outside. Her smile, slight but genuine, made the heart race unexpectedly, and there was a delicate tension in the air, a sense of connection that transcended mere neighborly courtesy. Every movement of hers, how she reached for a can from the counter, how her fingers brushed her hair back from her face, carried a subtle grace that made the moments linger longer in memory. Conversation flowed easily, yet beneath the surface was a current of unspoken questions and hesitations. She shared small stories about her late husband, her eyes occasionally glistening, and there was a raw honesty in her vulnerability. Every pause, every glance carried weight. A slight touch on the shoulder as I placed a bag down felt deliberate, intimate, but innocent. It was the kind of connection that made the world shrink to just the two of us, even in a bright, open kitchen with sunlight streaming through the windows. The encounter left a lasting impression, stirring emotions that hadn't existed before: curiosity, admiration, and a gentle, unacknowledged pull toward her. It was clear that there was more than simple neighborly friendship at play, yet it was subtle, almost imperceptible. The tension between politeness and the unspoken desire hung in the air like a fine mist, delicate yet undeniable. By the time I left her apartment, hands lingering for a fraction longer in farewell, the ordinary act of helping a neighbor had transformed into something far more profound. It wasn't just about groceries or casual conversation. It was the start of a slow-burn connection, one that promised to challenge boundaries, awaken unspoken feelings, and change the course of everyday life in ways that neither of us could have anticipated. After that first encounter, thoughts of her lingered long after the groceries were unpacked. The 40-year-old American woman with long black hair, lightly tanned skin, subtle freckles, soft laugh lines, and a curvy, graceful figure had imprinted herself on the mind in a way that felt impossible to shake. Her presence carried an effortless warmth, a subtle authority softened by vulnerability, and each memory of her glance, her gentle smile, or the light touch on my arm seemed to echo like a quiet heartbeat. The next day, she called, asking for another small favor: help moving some boxes from her living room to the garage. The simplicity of the request masked the nervous excitement that tightened my chest when she spoke. When I arrived, the sun poured through the large windows, casting a golden glow over her apartment. She stood near the doorway, dressed in a fitted cream blouse and tailored navy skirt, her long black hair catching the light. Her dark brown eyes met mine, and for a moment, everything else blurred. That subtle pause, the weight of unspoken thoughts, made time feel almost elastic, stretched and suspended in the warmth of the morning. As we carried boxes together, our hands brushed occasionally, fleeting but electric touches that made the pulse quicken. Her fingers lingered briefly on mine when she adjusted her grip, and the contact was charged with an intimacy that neither of us dared to name. She laughed softly at my awkward comment, a sound that seemed to wrap around the room, filling every corner with comfort and unexpected delight. The laugh lines at the corners of her eyes deepened, a testament to her life, experience, and genuine warmth. The work itself became secondary to the quiet moments of closeness. The way her shoulder occasionally pressed against mine, how her eyes searched mine with questions she didn't voice, and the small, almost imperceptible tilts of her head that made each gesture feel deliberate yet innocent. She spoke about her day, her routines, her memories, and even her fears, her voice steady yet tinged with an honesty that drew me in. I found myself sharing more than I usually would, feeling a trust that was both exhilarating and terrifying. When we finally stepped back, surveying the neatly arranged boxes in the sunlit garage, there was a mutual awareness, a silent acknowledgement of the subtle tension that had grown between us. Her fingers brushed mine one last time as she turned, and the warmth of that touch lingered far longer than physically possible. Words felt inadequate, and yet her gaze said everything, promising connection, stirring curiosity, and awakening feelings that were both new and profoundly unsettling. Leaving her apartment, the sunlight catching the edges of her long black hair, I realized that what began as neighborly assistance had already shifted into something much more potent. The ordinary gestures, the calls for help, the shared laughter, the fleeting touches, were weaving an invisible thread between us. Each moment was a careful step in a slow-burn connection, one that would test boundaries, awaken unspoken emotions, and leave both of us wondering just how far this unexpected bond could go. As days turned into weeks, the visits became more frequent under the guise of casual help. Each interaction was layered with subtle tension, a delicate dance between politeness and something far more intimate. The 40-year-old American woman, with her long black hair cascading over her shoulders, lightly tanned skin, soft laugh lines, and graceful posture, had begun to occupy an unshakable presence in my thoughts. Her dark brown eyes seemed to hold stories untold, moments of vulnerability, and an unspoken invitation that stirred emotions I wasn't prepared to confront. One afternoon, she asked for help organizing old photo albums and keepsakes. As I stepped into her apartment, sunlight spilling through the windows, there was a quiet hush, a kind of serenity that contrasted with the rapid beat of my heart. She greeted me with a soft smile, one that hinted at shared secrets yet to be revealed, and as our hands brushed while passing items, the contact lingered, warm and grounding. Every gesture, every glance, seemed charged with unspoken possibility. We sat side by side on the living room floor, sorting through memories captured in faded photographs and delicate letters. Her proximity was intoxicating. The subtle scent of her perfume, the warmth radiating from her body, the slight brush of her arm against mine. She laughed at a shared memory from one of the albums, and the sound was so soft yet so captivating that it pulled me closer without conscious thought. Her fingers grazed mine again as she handed me a photograph, a simple act that carried a weight I could almost taste, a tension that both exhilarated and terrified me. Conversation flowed easily, yet beneath the laughter and shared stories was a quiet, unspoken connection. She confided small thoughts, moments of self-doubt, and memories of her late husband, her voice steady but tender, her vulnerability exposed in a way that made the space between us feel alive and intimate. I found myself drawn to her honesty, the way she moved, the subtle curve of her smile, the way her eyes softened whenever she looked at me. Each moment was like a slow-burning spark, fragile yet undeniable, setting the stage for something far greater than friendship. Time seemed to stretch, elongated by the intensity of proximity and the electricity of small touches. A hand lingered a fraction longer than necessary on a stack of photographs. A shoulder brushed mine as we shifted positions. A shared glance held slightly too long. The world outside faded. The apartment became a cocoon of quiet intimacy and rising desire, careful and restrained yet impossible to ignore. When it was finally time to leave, her hand briefly touched my arm in farewell, and the warmth of that fleeting contact lingered long after I stepped outside. The slow-burn tension had deepened, transforming routine visits into moments of meaningful connection. It was becoming increasingly clear that her presence was reshaping my world, challenging boundaries, stirring desires, and awakening emotions that I had never anticipated. Each visit was no longer just about helping a neighbor. It was about navigating the uncharted territory of a growing, undeniable bond. By the time I found myself back at her apartment a few days later, there was a subtle shift in the air, a quiet tension that hinted at something unspoken. The 40-year-old American woman with long black hair, lightly tanned skin, subtle freckles, soft laugh lines, and a curvy, graceful figure seemed even more radiant in the soft afternoon sunlight filtering through her windows. Her dark brown eyes met mine with a warmth that was comforting yet charged, a quiet acknowledgement that the dynamic between us was evolving beyond neighborly familiarity. She asked for help with a small home repair, a task mundane on the surface but layered with opportunities for proximity and subtle gestures. As I handed her tools, our hands brushed several times, each contact lingering fractionally longer than necessary. There was a magnetic tension in these touches, the way her fingers lingered on mine while passing a screwdriver, or how her shoulder occasionally pressed against mine as we shifted positions to reach awkward spots. It was an intimacy that grew in quiet increments, almost imperceptible yet impossible to ignore. As she crouched to inspect a corner of the room, her long hair fell over one shoulder, and I couldn't help but notice the graceful curve of her neck, the softness in her movements, the confidence in how she carried herself even in a casual, everyday moment. Every detail, the subtle tilt of her head, the slight smile playing at the corners of her lips, the way her eyes glimmered when she spoke, conveyed a depth of presence and vulnerability that drew me in completely. Conversation wove naturally around the task, but beneath the words was an unspoken current of curiosity, longing, and tentative connection. She shared fleeting personal anecdotes, her voice tinged with both humor and a hint of wistfulness. Each story revealed layers of her personality, resilient yet tender, poised yet quietly vulnerable. Every laugh, every gentle gesture, every glance carried the weight of something more, something forbidden yet compelling, awakening an unanticipated emotional resonance within me. Time slowed as the mundane task became an intimate choreography of proximity, touch, and subtle emotional exchange. A hand lingered on a table edge just long enough to brush hers. A slight lean-in while explaining something brought our shoulders close together, and the warmth of her presence felt almost overwhelming. The room, bathed in bright natural light, seemed to contract around us, creating a bubble of quiet intimacy where the outside world ceased to exist. When the repair was finally complete, there was a moment of silence, an unspoken acknowledgement that something had changed. The lingering brush of her hand against mine as she thanked me sent a jolt through the chest, and the weight of the connection hung heavily in the air. What began as simple neighborly assistance had evolved into a delicate, slow-burning bond, each interaction leaving a lasting imprint. It was no longer casual kindness. It was the beginning of a connection that challenged boundaries, awakened desire, and promised a journey neither of us could ignore. The days following the repair visit were filled with an unusual anticipation, a quiet restlessness that made each text or call from her feel like a heartbeat in the chest. The 40-year-old American woman with long black hair, lightly tanned skin, subtle freckles, soft laugh lines, and a curvy, graceful figure seemed to radiate a warmth and presence that occupied every corner of my thoughts. Even in brief exchanges, the way she phrased her words, the subtle humor in her voice, and the softness of her tone created a magnetic pull that was impossible to ignore. One evening, she asked for help arranging furniture in her living room, a task that required careful attention, coordination, and the natural closeness that came with moving heavy items together. As I arrived, sunlight streamed through the windows, highlighting the contours of her face and the slight smile lines that spoke of experience, resilience, and gentle beauty. She wore a fitted blouse and comfortable slacks, her long black hair cascading elegantly over her shoulders. The sight of her in such an ordinary, unguarded moment made my heart race in ways I hadn't anticipated. Working side by side, our movements intertwined, lifting, shifting, adjusting. Hands occasionally brushed, lingering just enough to awaken awareness of each other's presence. When she rested her hand on my arm to steady a heavy chair, the warmth radiated in waves, stirring emotions that were both exhilarating and bewildering. Each shared laugh, each casual glance, became a silent conversation, unspoken words passing in the weight of a look or the brief closeness of our bodies. Conversation flowed easily, moving from mundane topics to subtle glimpses of vulnerability. She spoke of moments of loneliness, of memories that weighed lightly yet persistently on her heart. Her dark brown eyes met mine with unguarded honesty, creating a bridge of trust and intimacy that felt electric. I found myself drawn not just to her beauty or the allure of her presence, but to the depth of her mind and the warmth of her spirit. Every gesture, the tilt of her head, the careful placement of a cushion, the soft laugh that followed a playful comment, reinforced the growing connection. At one point, she paused and let her hand rest lightly on the back of my shoulder, guiding a piece of furniture into place. The contact was brief, yet the warmth lingered, leaving a trail of unspoken desire and heightened awareness. There was no rush, no forced movement, only the gradual unfolding of a bond that was growing in intensity with each shared task, each fleeting touch, each moment of silent understanding. When the work was complete, the living room transformed, but more significantly, so had the dynamic between us. The ordinary act of helping a neighbor had become a conduit for emotional intimacy and subtle romantic tension. The brush of her hand in farewell, the slight pause before she turned, and the weight of her gaze as I left created a resonance that carried far beyond the walls of her apartment. It was a slow, deliberate build, a soft burning connection that promised both challenge and exhilaration, leaving a lingering question in the heart. How far could this bond go, and what would happen when feelings could no longer be restrained? By now, the visits had become a rhythm neither of us acknowledged openly, but both of us anticipated. The 40-year-old American woman, with her long black hair, lightly tanned skin, subtle freckles, soft laugh lines, and graceful curvy figure, had become an inescapable presence in my daily thoughts. Her dark brown eyes, warm and inviting yet shadowed with unspoken depths, held a pull that both comforted and unnerved. There was a quiet electricity in the air every time we were near, a magnetic tension that made ordinary moments feel loaded with significance. One afternoon, she requested help with reorganizing her small home library. The task required moving stacks of books, shifting furniture, and reaching high shelves, each action bringing our bodies into proximity in ways that were natural but charged with an intimate energy. The sunlight streaming through the windows highlighted the contours of her face and the subtle curve of her smile, accentuating her mature beauty and confident presence. Every glance, every brush of her fingers against mine as we passed books, seemed to linger just long enough to make the heart skip a beat. As we worked side by side, conversation meandered seamlessly from trivial topics to personal reflections. She spoke softly about her late husband, her voice carrying a tender melancholy that revealed her vulnerability. Listening to her, I felt the fragile, precious weight of trust being extended, and the sensation stirred an unfamiliar desire to protect, to comfort, and to be present in her life in ways that went beyond simple neighborly courtesy. Her hand occasionally touched mine lightly when handing over a book, and the warmth that radiated from her skin sent a shiver of awareness down my spine, making even the most mundane actions feel intimate. The subtlety of our interactions became a language in itself. A pause in her speech, a quiet laugh, the tilt of her head when she listened closely, all conveyed emotions without words. The tension was slow-burning, restrained, and deliberate, making each touch, glance, or shared smile feel significant. Her presence was soothing yet exhilarating, like standing near a calm yet powerful current, impossible to resist. As we reached for a particularly high shelf, our shoulders brushed, and she leaned slightly closer to steady herself. The closeness was fleeting but heavy with unspoken meaning, and the brush of her arm left a lingering warmth that made the room feel smaller, more intimate. I became acutely aware of her subtle perfume, the softness of her hair falling against her shoulders, and the gentle cadence of her voice. Each moment reinforced the growing connection, a mixture of admiration, desire, and emotional intimacy that neither of us openly named but both silently acknowledged. When the task was complete, she paused, letting her hand rest lightly on my forearm in a gesture of gratitude. The contact lingered a heartbeat too long, a quiet acknowledgement of the bond that had deepened between us. Leaving her apartment, I felt the weight of unspoken possibilities, a mixture of exhilaration and uncertainty. The slow-burn tension had reached a point where every future interaction promised to deepen the connection further, each moment carrying the potential to transform our carefully balanced friendship into something more profound, something irresistible. The pattern of visits, help, and quiet conversations had established a rhythm that neither of us acknowledged aloud, but both of us felt deeply. By now, the 40-year-old American woman with long black hair, lightly tanned skin, subtle freckles, soft laugh lines, and a curvy, graceful figure had become a magnetic presence in every thought, every heartbeat. Her dark brown eyes carried warmth and quiet longing, and each time they met mine, there was a weight of unspoken emotions, vulnerability, attraction, and a growing desire that neither dared to name. This particular afternoon, she invited me over under the pretext of helping with some small home organization, but there was an unmistakable undertone, a deliberate closeness in her movements, a softness in her tone that spoke volumes. She wore a comfortable yet flattering outfit, a fitted blouse and casual slacks that highlighted her graceful posture, her long black hair cascading down her back. The sunlight pouring through the windows accentuated her mature beauty, the slight smile lines at the corners of her eyes, and the confident, serene presence she carried effortlessly. As we worked, our hands brushed multiple times, each contact lingering a fraction longer than necessary. There was a charged silence in the small apartment, punctuated by shared smiles and quiet laughter. Every subtle gesture, her hand lightly resting on my arm as she guided a box into place, the tilt of her head while she spoke, the way she leaned slightly closer to reach a high shelf, spoke a language of intimacy beyond words. I could feel her warmth, the subtle fragrance of her presence, the calm rhythm of her heartbeat when our bodies accidentally pressed together. At one point, she paused and rested her hand briefly on my shoulder, her dark brown eyes meeting mine with an intensity that made my pulse quicken. It was a gesture that carried comfort, gratitude, and something more, a hint of desire, a quiet invitation that neither of us dared to fully acknowledge. The tension between us was palpable, a delicate blend of admiration, longing, and unspoken attraction that made every small interaction significant. Conversation grew deeper, touching on memories, regrets, and dreams. Her voice softened as she shared stories of her past, moments tinged with loss but also resilience. Each word drew me closer emotionally, reinforcing a bond that had evolved beyond neighborly concern or casual friendship. It was a connection built on trust, shared vulnerability, and a slow, deliberate intimacy that had been simmering for weeks. As the visit came to a close, the brief touch of her hand on mine lingered a heartbeat too long. Our eyes met, and for a moment, the world outside faded, leaving only the quiet intensity between us. There was a decision hanging in the air, a crossroads of emotions where hesitation, fear, and longing intersected. The slow-burn attraction had reached its peak, a tension so tangible that stepping back felt impossible, yet inevitable. Walking away, the weight of what had passed, and the promise of what might come pressed heavily on my chest. This was no longer casual neighborly assistance. It was the start of something forbidden yet undeniable, a journey toward emotional intimacy and perhaps even love, fraught with uncertainty but impossible to resist. The connection had transformed our worlds, leaving me with a heart racing, a mind spinning, and a question that demanded an answer. How far would we allow ourselves to go?